Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, and sorry for a few minutes delay. I'm Neelama Jain, Deputy Director with Wadhwani Chair at CSIS. India has set itself some ambitious renewable energy targets, 175 gigs of renewable capacity by 2020 and 450 gigs by 2030. To put this in perspective, last November, the on-ground RE capacity accounted for 90 gigawatt at the total. While the acceleration of renewable deployment in the last decade has been remarkable, achieving these targets could be tricky unless the Indian states unlock the implementation on the ground. With their execution power and authority over critical sectors and the overall investment climate, Indian states play a crucial role in turning Government of India's promise to practice. There remains a great variance in states' progress on tackling climate change. So, what is holding them back? What local concerns must be addressed? Do the states see any benefit in engaging with US administration's climate change agenda? And how can the US India engagement support the states? To unpack this and more, I have a fantastic panel with me today. We have Sarah Ladislaw, Senior Vice President and Director of the Energy and National Security Program of CSIS, a leading name in the energy and climate change policy circles across the globe. Richard Verma, former US ambassador to India and the only US ambassador to travel to every Indian state. He played an important role in the passage of civil nuclear deal while being at the Hill. He has recently joined MasterCard as Exec VP. Manu Srivastava, a senior Indian bureaucrat, principal secretary at Government of Madhya Pradesh, who also chairs the REWA project, one of India's largest solar parks. Well, I should also take a moment to acknowledge SET Fund, whose generous support has made this workshop possible. A warm welcome to all of you. It is a real honor to host you and moderate this discussion. So without further ado, Sarah, let me first turn to you to set the scene for the panel on expected global priorities on climate change from the new administration and what implications this may have in shaping India's climate agenda. Sarah, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Neelama, so much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I couldn't think of a better timed event, particularly with the topic at hand. We are in the midst of really exciting but difficult times. It is not just a global climate challenge that we face, but also a recovery from an ongoing pandemic that has really seized the world with a different kind of urgency about not just our economic well-being, but the health of our citizenry and the health of our planet. And so I think it's a really important time for us to take a look at many of the global challenges that we face and ask ourselves whether we're doing enough, whether we're positioned enough to take these opportunities and really try and tackle these challenges. And I think, was asked to talk a little bit about the incoming Biden administration. They've already been quite hard at work within the first week on the job. I guess it'll mark a week this coming Wednesday. They've been quite busy. And I think just a few opening comments to think not just about how the Biden administration is positioned on this topic, but why in particular the role of state and subnational actors are particularly important. And so one of the things I think is really important to mention is that this period of time is this period of time is not similar to where we found ourselves in 2015, right? So many people have noted that this administration, their first pledge was to get back into the Paris Climate Agreement. They've already sent the letter and signed the order to be able to do that. But beyond that, the challenges today are quite different. This is not about mobilizing a global effort to negotiate an agreement. We've done that. This is not necessarily about coming up with a framework for thinking about how nations govern their activities and actions relative to one another. This is a time for delivering on promises. This is a time for ratcheting up ambition. It's a time for putting things like the Paris Climate Agreement into action, which means trying to help as much as possible states and local communities, countries, to be able to not only deliver on the promises that they made, but deliver on them, learn, and figure out ways to do them better. And I think that's why topics like the conversation we'll talk about today, partnerships between the US and India, obviously are important. But as you note, as you'll note, the over the weekend, Secretary Kerry, the new incoming Biden special envoy for climate change, and his domestic counterpart, Gina McCarthy, spent time talking to US mayors. So in early recognition that this subnational element, the idea that, the United States is not just going to have to talk with international partners, as Secretary Kerry did last week to the B20, a group of global businesses thinking about how they will engage in dealing with global climate change, but they also deal with state and local communities asking, how can you do better? How can we raise your level of performance? How can we raise your level of ambition? What are the technological challenges we have to face? What are the economic or policy challenges that we need to be able to overcome together. And I think what we'll see in the next several weeks is how this administration intends to use a series of multilateral initiatives, existing multilateral initiatives, maybe some new ones, but also, existing laws and regulation, thinking about how they're going to be able to advance the climate agenda both here and internationally. I think one thing that's really important in this type of context is this idea that states and local communities are laboratories of action. And we should not be overly hubristic about this. We shouldn't think that we know all of the answers to how we're going to reach net zero emissions targets very quickly in an unprecedented timeframe, and do so in a way that creates new economic opportunity. We need to learn from each other. We need to learn in different contexts, in different applications, how successes are being made, how people are able to overcome challenges. And this is where I think, some of the work, Neelima, that your team and our team at CSIS have been doing and thinking about on US state and Indian state collaboration could really help highlight some of those areas for opportunity. So I look forward to a really good discussion today.
Thanks, Sarah. These are great points. And it's good to see that there is already an execution-based focus. You bring in subnational diplomacy into the main discourse. And you know that the global challenges will require local solutions first. So the subnational diplomacy is definitely the first place to start. Let me turn to Ambassador Richard Burma. Well, building on your experience in India, what are the best ways for the Indian states to proactively engage with Biden administration's climate change agenda? I know there are limitations on the ground, but keeping that aside, what could be those low-hanging fruits that you would recommend?
Well, thank you, Neelima. Thank you, CSIS. It's great to be on this panel with Sarah, with Manu Shrivastava. It's really an incredible team. And Rick Rossow, who's not here with us, is the leader on Indian states and subnational diplomacy. I've learned so much from him. He's been a great counselor to all of us over the years. Let me just say this. I do think the single biggest area of future cooperation between the US and India in the months and years ahead is in clean energy and battling climate change. There's no question about it. And I think we should recognize that this has not always been the case. And so I think a little bit of just perspective of how we got here and how quickly we got here. If I was to say to you 10 years ago that I thought that renewable energy cooperation was our biggest pathway of working together, people would have said that's not possible. But I do believe it's the case. I think we go back to the mid-2000s first with civil nuclear cooperation as a big breakthrough, but I think most would agree we've been stalled since that time due to liability issues, funding concerns over safety of nuclear. And of course, perhaps most significantly, because of the rapid development of new technologies and innovations in the renewable space. The field has moved at a breakneck speed. There's no question about it. And so we made slow, steady, measurable progress on a variety of really super innovative programs. I think of the Partnership for Clean Energy, the PACE program. PACE was so successful, it had so many different iterations. There was PACE-R and PACE-D and PACER. I lost track of the number of PACE programs, but that's just one example of how much we did. But I also credit India with being a leader in this space and pushing the envelope in moving to a renewable future. I remember back in 2015 when President Obama visited India for Republic Day, the US and India stood together in declaring their shared commitment at that time to meet India's renewable target of 100 gigawatts by 2022, and jointly declaring, quote, that climate change was a profound threat to humanity. So here we were previously declaring about profound threats related to terrorism, related to other challenging factors in the region. And here we were declaring climate change a profound threat to humanity, and that hasn't changed. Now, India has moved even faster since that time. And as Nilima mentioned, the world's largest commitment, 450 gigawatts by 2030. Is that easily achievable? Of course not. It is not easily achievable. But that's where working together, India with its friends and partners, with civil society, private industry, India can get there. And we've been driven together to this green revolution, of course, because of innovations and incredible advancements in science, but also because of the threats we face and because of this ecosystem dominated by fossil fuels. We just have to look at the damage done in the United States, in India, in Asia, to our agriculture, to migration, the disruptions in the economy, the severe weather patterns, the erratic monsoons. I could go on and on. People even talk about the climate and COVID connections. There's a lot here that's posing a real threat. And so whether you live in the United States or South Asia, the need to cooperate between these two large economies, the largest democracies in the world, is so important. And of course, there's been great progress. Solar Alliance, Paris Climate Agreement, something in the words of President Obama would not have been possible without India's leadership. And I'm glad to report, as Sarah reported, that the US is back in on the first day of President Biden's presidency. And I just say personally, I've spoken to then Vice President Biden numerous times about India, about the renewable pathway forward with India. I know how committed he is to this personally. If you look at some of the statements he made over the summer about working with India, not only on fighting climate change, but he said this, he said, no global challenge could be solved without India and the US working together. Think about that. That's a really powerful statement. And of course, he's put together this great group of experts at state, at the National Security Council, who know India well. And that includes my former boss, John Kerry, who is Secretary of State, traveled to India numerous times, was the lead negotiator on Paris, and who will again count India as an essential partner. There's no question. So let me answer your specific question about states directly, about how Indian states engage with the Biden administration. And this is, I'll be honest, this is inherently difficult given our federal system. Central governments are inherently equipped and programmed to deal with other central governments. But as you said, I know that the real action in India is at the state level. And I had the great privilege and honor to going to every Indian states. And you know what's happening in India on economic growth, on innovation, on technical development, smart cities, electric vehicles, development of smart grids, and so much more is taking place at the state level. So it's essential for Indian states to be involved directly. And when we think about it, many Indian states are more populous and generate more economic activity than major countries in the world. The state as a unit of engagement is essential for the United States. So a few specific things. First, work through our consulates. We've got 4 great consulates in India, and I know they are out and about in all of the states. They are trying to maximize engagement with the United States, and they do a terrific job. And I know that clean energy and battling climate change is part of the agenda for this administration. Secondly, chief ministers should travel more frequently to the United States and engage not only with officials in DC, but get around the country. And I saw a lot of that over the last few years ramp up considerably, and we'd love to see more of that. Indian states should also be clear about the kinds and levels of investments and technologies they need, and ensure that the United States government is aware, but also that private industry is aware. And I think we've had a mixed record on this. And I think states should be really quite clear about the kind of investments, and not only the kinds of investments, but what is the investment climate like in that particular state. And I will say, just a trend that I've watched, when US companies and private industry were coming to India over the last many years, they would spend, yes, some time in Delhi, but they would then immediately turn their focus to the States. And that's a good development. And they would go out, and they knew, because of the rankings, which states were the most competitive. They knew, because of the ease of doing business index, which states they should gravitate towards. And in the clean energy and renewable space, this is so essential. So those are just a few ideas with a little bit of history. And maybe I'll pause there and look forward to your future questions.
That's great. You put a lot of things on the table there, and especially the elements of cooperative and competitive federalism. Yes, it has in the past given a jump start to a lot on the ground. Now, let me turn to Secretary Manu Srivastava. I understand that states are driven more by the economy agenda than the environment agenda, but what are the range of political and economic factors that might promote and constrain state-level climate change commitments and progress? Also, it'll be great if you could give us some successful examples of entities who are leading by example on the ground.
Firstly, I would say that the states in India, the way the Indian system is, especially in the electricity sector, would have a substantial role in pushing the climate change goals. Because the way things are in India, it is definitely for the government of India to lay down the broad contours, or to lay down the broad regulations of how things have to be run in the electricity sector, of how much renewable energy, for example, has to be used. But when it comes to the enthusiasm, whether those regulations are followed, because in India we have, frankly, too many laws, and it is not that all the laws are always followed, even by government organizations. So the enthusiasm that comes with following laws depends a lot on the viability, and it also depends on where the organization is placed. The closer it is to the ground, the closer it is to an actual balance sheet, the more its decisions are driven by the issues of viability. So the person who's actually handling the DISCOM, the utility, or the state government, which is actually closer to the DISCOM or the utility than the government of India, then their enthusiasm for usage of renewable energy depends a lot on the rate of renewable energy and how viable the entire exercise is. So these days, for example, the cost of solar energy, thanks to initiative of Sumant and his friends, has come down to as low as 2 rupees, or you can say less than 3 US cents. Whereas if you set up a new coal-based plant, you would get power at around 4.5 rupees, or almost 6 US cents per unit, and that cost would keep on increasing every year. And the solar cost is a flat cost. So these things have done a lot to increase the enthusiasm of practitioners, of DISCOMs about renewable energy. And we hope that as the total demand for energy in the country increases, then the pie of renewable energy would increase all the more. So if you're talking about clean energy in general, I would say that the interaction between US and Indian states could be in making other areas more viable as renewable energy has become viable. The areas that come to my mind immediately are energy efficiency, where a lot can happen in India, and not as much as has happened in renewable energy. So energy efficiency is an area where we need to do a lot. Electric mobility, the solar thermal is another area where we have not done too much. Of course, hydrogen is a fairly new thing. So these are areas where perhaps US could make these areas more viable, and then the Indian states and organizations could be more enthusiastic about fulfilling the regulations of Government of India and the various climate change goals. And the assistance from US could be in form of technology, could also be in the form of regulations, where there are also certain regulations where I suppose we can make things simpler for renewable energy. For example, in India, we still have transmission charges per megawatt and not per unit, which is a huge, which is not really a level playing ground as far as renewable energy is concerned. And then there is finance. So these are areas, various areas in which US can work together with Indian states in fulfilling our shared climate agenda goals. And here I would say it is not really the US government. It is now US organizations. There are multilateral organizations. There are pension funds in the US. Many pension funds have decided not to invest in non-clean energy solutions. So perhaps compared to 5 or 6 years or 10 years back, we have reached a stage where a lot of organizations, financial organizations, universities, think tanks, even they can directly play a role and help Indian states in reaching those targets.
Thank you, Secretary. Those are great points. Let me turn to the industry voice here. Sumant Sinha, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of RenewPower, country's largest renewable energy independent producer. Sumant, what does the business environment look like in a state transitioning to net zero? Which states are leading the pack, and what initiatives have they taken to be both business and climate smart? Sumant, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just saying, wow, that's a pretty big question. But thanks a lot. Thank you so much for inviting me for this show. First of all, a hello to all the other panelists on this. Rich, Manu, and Sarah. Needham, the question that you asked is a tough one simply because none of the Indian states are thinking about net zero right now. So I think to associate net zero in the same sentence with states in India, I think is a bit of a misnomer. But the reality is that, the Indian central government certainly is moving towards, as you know, much more ambitious targets of renewable energy. And I think that's by itself a big positive. We all know that the Prime Minister has taken upon himself personally the target to deliver 450 gigawatts. And when I say personally, I mean it's become an agenda for the entire government to deliver. And so the central government, for its part, is certainly doing its best to make sure that electrification itself becomes a lot greener and cleaner as we go forward. And the expectation is that by 2030, if we hit the target of 450 gigawatts, by that time, renewables will form almost about anything between 35 to 40% of the total power generation, not just from a capacity standpoint, but from a power generation standpoint. So the central government certainly has set those targets. Now, the place where we have a problem really is at the state government level, which is that the states are not impelled by the same imperatives, unfortunately. They have their own agendas, they have their own problems, they have their own issues. And Manu, of course, has been working in the state level for many years, so he understands these issues from the inside perspective. But we have to deal with the state governments quite substantially. Their issues are very different. And I don't think that they have really internalized this from a renewable energy target standpoint at all. They are doing this only because it is, or largely because, I shouldn't say only because, they're doing it largely because renewables is cheaper now at least, and so therefore it makes sense for them to do it. There is, of course, a renewable purchase obligation target that devolves from the central government guidelines, but those are enforced only in the breach. And so therefore, unfortunately, not at all enforced. And therefore, the states are not party to this, grand endeavor to reduce our carbon emissions at this point in time, unfortunately. Now, having said that, I would say that this is something that will change, because I think Public perception is moving in that direction. The central government is moving in that direction. Conversations are becoming, a little bit stronger, certainly about pollution, if not about carbon emissions in India. But again, fortunately, the addressal of both happens through the same issue of more renewables, let's say, in the grid and so on. So in that sense, at least there is an alignment between the two. So I think states will slowly move in that direction. But at this point, they are being driven more by economic imperatives than by climate change imperatives. And so I think this is the big gap in the Indian climate change effort, that the states are not party to whatever the central government is trying. And I think unless that gap is bridged, we will have only half-hearted efforts. So, and that unfortunately is the issue. Now, I would say industry itself is also not really moving actively in that direction, because it's not like Indian industries are proactively setting targets either for themselves, where they're saying that we'll go net zero and so on. That is unfortunately not happening either. And so I think both Indian industry and states are kind of in the same boat right now. And we need to have more stronger guidelines, either coming from the central government, or for this conversation from civil society becoming bigger, or possibly from countries like the US saying, you know what, we'll try to become part of this conversation in some way, shape, or form. And instead of leading only by the virtue of words, we will lead by the virtue of capital or some other form of subsidization or contribution from their side. In which case, maybe there is a different way of looking at it. But in the absence of that, and I doubt that that will happen very much, and Rich, of course, can tell us more. In the absence of that happening, I think we'll just muddle along as we are doing right now. And it'll take many more years for momentum to really gather on some of these things, unfortunately.
Thanks, Sumant. I think you've grounded us all, at least me. I'm like, I now know the ground reality better. What I'm hearing is that the center and state, the priorities are misaligned, and it's largely because of the political will and the political economy at the state, which is obviously largely driven by the economic agenda and not as much by the environment agenda. Sarah, let me turn to you. You've heard rest of the panelists. What kind of signals do you think, or would you expect at this point in time from the Indian states?
It's a good question, and I'm really sort of taken aback by this the comment sort of lead by the virtue of capital, which I hope we can credit to you and then hopefully steal and use in other forums, because I think it's really quite important. Listen, I'm not actually dismayed by the idea that Indian states are leading on economic terms, right? We've had sort of the reverse of that narrative in the United States for a long time, where we're states and local communities were actually doing things like promoting renewable energy, not for their economic virtues, but for their environmental virtues. And there was seen to be a cap on their ability to really, deploy as many renewables or to decarbonize the power sector or the transportation sector, because they were uneconomic, right? And so what I think is really interesting about this moment in time is that if you have state and local communities that see economic virtue in renewable energy and in decarbonization efforts, and you recognize the broader macro context, which is that many other states are trying to become leaders in the deployment of those resources, the only reason you go bigger and go faster is for the environmental virtues, right? Or else you just muddle along. That is what makes climate change a very different kind of challenge. You are not moving the economy along in this sort of normal pathway. You're doing on an expedited time scale. And so I think one of the things that would be really helpful, both from US states and from Indian states, is to be able to communicate the potential for even bigger and broader transformative economic opportunity if they got the right signals, if they got the right capital, if they could point to specific places where they could move even faster and achieve even more gains from sort of the economic signals that they're seeing to date. And I think that this is a very productive tension that we've seen in the United States. I know personally, the shift that you see on Capitol Hill within Congress in support for renewable energy and decarbonization technologies is because these lawmakers are seeing progress at the state level. They're seeing their constituencies supporting the kind of economic opportunity that's coming from clean energy, and they want to see more of that. It's not because they've changed their perspective on climate change necessarily. It's because the economic realities have shifted. And so I think, the idea that states have been able to cultivate economic opportunity and send that signal to the federal workforce or to the federal government has been really important. And to the extent that Indian states have the ability to send that same signal to say, perhaps maybe the movement for a net zero environment could come from Indian states, right? The ones that say, I want these kinds of signals because I want to be able to transform my workforce and my economy into the one that takes advantage of this economic opportunity. And in so doing, maybe push the central government a little bit further in what they're willing to do. I know it's happening in a different order in different countries, but maybe that's, the way that Indian states could signal that their willingness to move farther faster because they see economic opportunity.
So, this sort of sets the context for my next question, because what you are talking about is changing the narrative. I'll turn to Ambassador Verma and ask him to recommend how can the US states help Indian states change that narrative for climate change?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the points that have been made, I think, are really, really important. If we think about why we have been slow in this area, there have been a lot of obstacles, and Sumant would know better than anybody. The technology, right, held us back for a time. There were storage issues, there were transmission issues, there were cost issues. We've overcome a lot of the technology issues. There were the economic issues. Yes, there's a huge upside, but yes, there's also a transformation taking place where there are winners and losers, right? And so if you're a chief minister or if you're a governor, you don't often think 10 years ahead or 15 years ahead. You think about what you have to do this year to make sure more people are employed than in the previous year and more people have a living wage than in the prior year. And so often these come into conflict. But as Sarah said, the economics have turned. The benefits of a green economy are now quite clear. And so as she said, a lot of politicians who were skeptical about climate change may still be very skeptical about climate change, but I also think they see the incredible economic opportunity for their states. But the opportunity, if we just think about what's happening in the United States and India just thinks about what's happening in India, that's pretty limiting. And so that's where we have to be able to link up our great kind of experts with your great experts, our exciting things happening at the state level with yours. So the question is, how do we do that? And again, I guess I think back to my experience in the embassy. I think, I didn't count, but I think we hosted more mayors and governors than we did senior US government officials. And that's a great development. And they were out talking about how to cooperate with other states. And I think something that Manu said is also really important, though. We have to think beyond governments. Governments can set a standard, they can set a direction, but let's be honest, the real innovation is taking place in civil society, in academia, in private industry. And so that's where those connections are today, and we need to make sure those connections become even stronger. But let me just mention really what's at the heart of some of our challenges, and that's finance. That is finding the capital. The one, I'll say something semi-controversial. I think the one thing that Washington and New Delhi have in common is a bit of a cash-strapped central government, right? If you were to go look for hundreds of billions of dollars of money to invest in from our US government or from the Indian central government, you wouldn't find it. And that's okay. And that's okay because we know that capital is out there in the private marketplace. We do know that capital is looking for places to go invest. And I do think there is so much we can do in the area of green finance and renewable finance. And there have been some creative US-India government programs here. We have to do more. We have to focus it at the state level and really develop those financing tools. We have some things like the Clean Energy Finance Task Force. We have the Development Finance Corporation. We obviously have USAID. Those are tools in order to leverage the massive amount of wealth that sits right now, unfortunately, on the sidelines.
Thanks. Thank you, Ambassador. I'll pose the same question to Secretary Srivastava. How is it that we can sell the success story of climate change to states like yours?
I would also like to respond to what Ambassador Richard Verma said. I would feel that the way renewable energy has moved in India, it has not really taken that much capital investment from the governments, either central government or the state government. I think the responsibility of the practitioners or of the government is actually to set up projects which encourage private sector investment, to set up projects where private sector investment is de-risked, where there is a sufficient mitigation of risks, where there is an equitable allocation of risks. And if that is done, then I do not think that availability of finance would be a challenge. The other thing I would like to say is that apart from the states and DISCOMs, as Sumant rightly said, most of the DISCOMs are cash strapped and they find it difficult to appreciate the environmental concerns as much. Perhaps we could also think in terms of huge organizations in India which consume renewable energy. For example, we had set up a Riva solar project, and Delhi Metro is getting power from a Riva solar project, and around 60% of its daytime demand is being fulfilled by the solar project in Madhya Pradesh. Now, Delhi Metro was not driven by any regulatory directions when it decided to procure solar energy. It was entirely an economic decision, because the expected rate of solar power and what it proved to be even better was much lesser than the cost at which Delhi DISCOMs were giving them power. So we can perhaps set up projects, institutional customers, they could even be in the government. There's so many port authorities in India, so many, there could be steel authority and so on. So they could be institutional customers who, right now what is happening is that we are forcing unwilling DISCOMs to increasingly offtake renewable energy, and we are not encouraging willing institutional customers or enabling them to consume renewable energy. So I suppose this is another area where we need to work. And as practitioners, I suppose we need to essentially de-risk the projects. That if we do that, I'm confident that there are so many financial institutions, sovereign funds, there are pension funds, which would be keen to invest. They don't want phenomenal returns. What they want is assured returns. If we can give payment guarantees, for example, in the Riva project I'm talking about, the state government actually gave a guarantee saying that if DISCOM does not pay in time, the state government would pay. So if these things are done, I'm sure there would be easy availability for of finance for companies like the one Sumant is so wonderfully heading. So I suppose things can happen, and I would again reiterate what Ambassador Richard Verma said, that things have moved in the past 5-10 years, and the central governments, obviously their blessings and their regulatory space, regulatory directions that they create are extremely necessary. But within that, renewable energy at least has become viable. So if we have the right regulations, we set up the right projects, if there would be no dearth of finance, there is no dearth of the enormous energy that private sector like Sumant Sinha's company, they have. There is absolutely no dearth of that, and then things can happen far faster.
Thank you, Secretary. Suman, my question is really in terms of bilateral industry linkages, right? Do you think industry to industry connections or business to business connections between two geographies as diverse as US and India could still mainstream the success stories or success case studies of climate change in a local context of India?
No, obviously that would help for sure. If we could have more um, contacts between the respective economic environments of the major players, if they were to interact with each other a little bit more, of course that would help, right? But having said that, I think that, and in fact, let me just take a step back to actually agree with Rich when he said that we have to move beyond the governments now and civil society, academicians, corporates, research think tanks, etc., have to now start interacting with each other. And in some ways, that's addressing your question as well. I think that level of interaction certainly needs to increase. And conversations like this are, in fact, one step in that direction. So, in fact, we are doing exactly that. We're trying to get more of transfer of ideas and thoughts and so on to happen. Um, in our case, for example, we have been in conversations with, for example, Stanford University, working with their professors on storage technologies. Right? We have a tremendous number of installed megawatts here. They have new technologies. We are trying to see how they can test those technologies in our capacities here, so that while they test them in the US, they also test them in India under slightly different conditions. So we're trying to work on those kinds of on those kinds of linkages more and more as we go forward. We're also in touch with some of the national laboratories like LBNL and so on, because they have done a lot of very interesting work on the Indian grid and what it takes for in the Indian grid to absorb more renewable energy capacities and to maintain the stability of the grid. So we're trying to engage with them as well to see how we can, what the learnings could be for us, for the Indian government, and so on. So I would say a lot of those kinds of partnerships have begun to sprout and are blossoming and are doing well. I think the biggest one, however, is the relationship of capital providers with capital in the US looking for investment opportunities in India. And there, a lot of capital has already moved. For example, my company started right in the beginning with an equity infusion from Goldman Sachs almost 10 years ago. So it's not as if this is a new thing. US investors have been investing in Indian companies for quite a long time and will continue to do so. And I think that that process will be strengthened. And as Manu said, the government does not need to do anything but provide the right enabling environment and the overall framework, and that capital will move, because that capital is looking for investing opportunities. So that to me is the biggest form of partnership. The other thing I should also tell you is that the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, the erstwhile OPIC, is also a big lender for Indian renewable energy projects, perhaps the biggest overseas lender into Indian projects. And our company has, for example, also got a $600 million line from the DFC under the previous administration. And so that tells you that despite that, there was still a lot of move from the US side into India. So hopefully all of that will just strengthen a lot more as we go forward. So I would say your question is correct, that we need to have more of those linkages. And I'm pretty confident that under the leadership of the new administration, with John Kerry now as the new climate czar, who are people who are much more passionate about addressing climate change, particularly in countries like India, I think you'll see a lot more of that of those bilateral linkages becoming stronger. And I think that is going to be a big positive. My only hope is that, and I'll be a little bit provocative here, is that it shouldn't become too intrusive, because the Indian government has a tendency at some point of saying, enough, but and no more. So it's important for the US government and their enthusiasm not to cross that line, because the Indian government is already doing quite a bit, right? And so therefore, in trying to push a little bit harder, they should not cause Indian prickliness, the famous Indian prickliness, to sort of needlessly raise its head. So I think that's where the art will be from the US side, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Sumit. And practical advice, hopefully heard by all who need to hear it. But the common thirst that is in a particular discussion is that there has to be a bottom-up approach. The dialogue has to be more inclusive, and we will have to involve more and more non-state actors in the discussion. Okay, I will open the floor to some questions. There are many that are trickling in. Let us see how many we can handle in our time limit. So the first is from Mulshri Mittal. As Indian individuals, how can we encourage our states to prioritize climate change regarding the environmental agenda as well? That's a great question. Who can take that?
Perhaps Manu can, since he's worked in the state governments and will be
well,
able to guide us.
Well, I would say that we need many, many more voices than the question that has just come. And I mean, the little of Indian democracy that I know, I don't think that in the immediate future we can think of climate change becoming an agenda which really drives government. So that is what I had said in the beginning, that the enthusiasm of state governments has a lot to do with how viable the entire thing is. So if we could, there is a role to be played in terms of technology by providing the technology, and there is a role to be played by practitioners like perhaps me and Sumant and the organizations which are active in this area to proactively do things by having better regulations, by having better projects, which push down the price and make it economically viable decision for governments and discoms to have a greater share of renewable energy. So the question that I asked is actually welcome, but I don't see that in the next few years that is going to be the biggest political agenda in the country, in most parts of the country. I mean, even Delhi, you look at it, Delhi is suffering so much from pollution, but I would know if in a Delhi election, climate change somehow becomes an important agenda. I wish it would, but.
You know, can I just add something though? It's an interesting
Yes.
question about how you characterize it. Because what I saw in Delhi is if you talk to people about climate change, you know, it's not at the top of their list. But if you talk to people in Delhi about air pollution, or clean water, it actually starts to climb to the top of their list pretty quickly because it hits them, you know, their immediate family, their immediate livelihood. And so I don't know, I sense the ground shifting. I also sense the younger generation kind of pushing the older generation quite hard on this, which is exactly right. And I welcome that kind of shift. So just to, I understand Manu's right about how difficult it is politically, but I think the ground has shifted and is shifting.
So the next question is from Shazia Rafi. Well, it's about how can we get the elected officials, both in the US and in India, at federal, state, and city levels, together on Paris Agreement and the UN SDGs 2030. So it's again, political economy, political will, narrative. How could we get them all together?
Sarah, you want to start?
I would. My connection broke up just a little bit as you were talking, Nilima. So you had a question. It was SDGs in 2030.
Yeah, well, the question is that how can we get the elected officials in the US and India together on agendas like Paris Agreement?
Sorry. Thank you very much. I'm of two minds on this. To be candid with you, I think if you listen to what Secretary Kerry has been saying as he's talking to his counterparts around the world, and something we've known for quite some time is that we have these agendas, but we know we're behind. And so I am actually quite worried that we're going to announce different targets, or we're going to focus on things that are more about sort of changing the focus as opposed to doubling down on actually delivering on the things that we promised. And so I think one of the really important areas to get countries together and state and local groups together with, their country counterparts is on those blockages. What is it that's keeping us from getting to, our, 30% renewables target, if you're thinking about the SDGs, or, what are countries' blockages in getting to their NDC goals, rather than have everyone focus just on being more ambitious in word only. And so I think that there's a lot of like high priority items where I think it gets back to a theme that we've talked about here. Like, how do you match capital with opportunity? How do you figure out those places where there are blockages? How do you figure out places where stronger signaling would actually help unlock certain opportunities? And I think that those are the types of things where a lot of ongoing collaboration is really necessary, but it's on delivering on those things, right? Delivering on those promises, not just coming together to come up with new targets and timetables and goals, because we can all say really wonderful things. It's really about being able to deliver on them now, so that, the best sign of the best instigator for future confidence and greater ambition is success. And when countries and states and local communities and businesses can point to the successes that they've had, then it builds confidence for others to do the same. So I think that really, focusing on the boring sort of nitty-gritty project by project opportunities is going to be the area where most collaboration is necessary.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll take one last question from Kartikeya Singh. This is for Manu. So if climate change action, which is mitigation, isn't an imperative to act on decarbonization, then is the conversation on adaptation a better angle?
Yes, I suppose, as they say that the life is the art of the possible. So perhaps it makes sense to focus on those areas which are easily possible. Having said that, I would say that a lot has happened in the field of renewable energy in the last few years. So I mean, we don't need to be feeling defensive about that at all. A lot has happened. Our targets are fairly ambitious. So yes. A lot more should happen, and with the rates of renewable energy that we have, there is no reason that it should not be happening. So we need to put our house in order. But yes, there are a lot of things do come to mind. For example, what I said about willing institutional customers being encouraged through regulations and through better projects to adopt renewable energy. I mean, it's something that makes absolute sense to them. I mean, Delhi Metro is saving around 100 crore per year. 100 crore rupees per year by taking the solar energy and not taking the more expensive conventional power from Delhi Discoms. So there are many more organizations like Delhi Metro who could be encouraged to do the same. And perhaps it's high time we leave our obsession with unwilling Discoms to push more renewable energy. And similarly, there are other things like energy efficiency, something that has been entirely ignored in our country. So these are things which need to be done, because as I would again repeat that we have a lot to be proud of. A lot of things have happened in the last few years, but our targets are steep. So if they look small, it is more with respect to the targets, but not really with respect to where we were 4, 5, 10 years back. Things have really ramped up in the last few years. Having said that, these are things that come to mind. Better regulations, things like for renewable energy, the transmission charge should be not per megawatt but per unit, because that's a very unfair thing for solar energy or wind energy, for example. Having better projects, de-risking projects, encouraging institutional customers to consume power. These are easy things that come to mind that would encourage us to enable us to achieve our targets. Yes.
Thanks. So we've come very close to the top of the hour. So I'm going to request each of you to very quickly conclude the session by answering what is your half-crazy prediction for US-India relationship for the next 4 years, of course, in the context of climate change. Ambassador Verma?
I get to go first. First, let me thank you for organizing. Thanks for the discussion. Great to see everyone, the panelists here. Look, I think, as I said, I think this is going to be our biggest priority area in the years ahead, along with our other, security and defense and trade and so much. But I really think this can be a priority area. So, what are my predictions? I think the U.S. and India will work together to refresh Paris. I think we'll have a Paris Part 2. I hope the US joins the International Solar Alliance. I think that would be a confidence building measure. I hope we do what we said we would do here today, which is focus on the states more and more. I hope we kind of rechannel our strategic energy partnership towards renewables. I think we're going to have to pivot back towards the clean energy side. And finally, I think a point that was mentioned earlier, how we talk to each other, how we engage with each other, is important, and I think we'll do that as co-equals and as partners in this important pathway ahead.
Thanks, Ambassador. Sarah?
Yeah, I take all the points here. It is a great discussion to heart. I think the two things, one prediction and one thought. I want to caution that we have this tendency to look for, who's responsible for making the next move in terms of pursuing a deep decarbonization agenda. And the truth of the matter is, like, we all bear a responsibility, and there's enormous amounts of potential. And so I think we, wherever governments and companies and states have an opportunity to make progress, they should take it, because it's a competitive environment now. This is a race for the future. This is not a job that needs to be undertaken, with a burden. And so I think that, approaching it from that standpoint is going to be important. And with that, I think that my, crazy prediction is I think India will have a net zero target. I don't know whether it will come from the states or it'll come from the center, but there will be net zero targets starting to proliferate in India, because I think that India has so much to gain from this opportunity, and being able to move quickly will be imperative to its own success.
That's good crazy, Sarah.
Thank you.
Secretary Srivastava?
I would think in terms of better de-risk projects, more usage of renewable energy by a broader cross-section of customers, more innovative projects in the country. And I am sure that Ambassador Verma also mentioned that the International Solar Alliance would be strengthened in the years to come, and that should show a path to how the path that the sun takes around the world. It should take a path which should throw more light around how solar energy can become the way for the future.
Sure. Final word has to be from the industry. Sumant?
I'm glad that you made me the voice of the industry all the way through. No, look, I think a lot has been said. A lot of crazy and not so crazy predictions have already been made. I'd echo a lot of what Rich said. I think he was right on the money with a lot of the things that he talked about. Not that the others weren't as well, but I think he encapsulated the whole thing very well. I think that the only other thing I would add to that mix is that at least for the next 1 or 2 years, I see a lot of liquidity coming into the renewable energy sector. I mean, it's there in general in the global markets. A lot of it is already flowing into ESG stocks. That whole phenomenon is going to keep increasing at a much more rapid pace. And as yields compress very significantly in the US, that capital is going to start looking for other homes as well. And India is going to be obviously one of the key markets, one of the biggest markets. So we'll see a lot of capital, hopefully, therefore flowing into India. And that will therefore hopefully mean many more projects getting funded, many more projects getting done. So I see that as being a big activity. The other thing is that we have to somehow find a way of getting the states to the table. Otherwise, all the targets will not materialize. We are a federal country after all. And so I think that certainly if the US has to engage, obviously engage at the central level, which is of course a must and a given. But I think beyond that, begin to really engage with the states. So I think if Secretary Kerry wants to come down, he should probably come down and do a roadshow and meet the state governments, and actually use his charm on them as much as he can to try to get them into alignment. At least some of the critical states, whether it's Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, which are the larger economically and industrialized states of the country. And the other thing I would say is that also focus on the private sector, because ultimately, even if the central government does not have a net zero target, if companies can start adopting net zero targets, and that itself will be a big move forward. So I think that is something that we should try to see whether we can all, as civil society, try to move companies in that direction as well.
Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I cannot thank you enough for your openness and your rich insights. And of course, states are a good place to start. So thank you, and thanks all for joining in.
Thanks, Amrita. Thanks, Suman.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Nilima.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.